Do it.
Do it.
Welcome to the Austin Otaku Podcast, hosted by Jesse McDonald and Keith Good.
All right. So, why are we here today, Keith? What are we doing?
Well, that's a very existential question to ask on a Friday. Why are we here? I don't know yet, and I'm 48. Well, we're just a couple of guys that like to riff off of each other, and why the heck not record it?
Yeah, right. I mean, so for those that don't know us, I'm Jesse McDonald. This is my good Thunder buddy, Keith. And
you're good, but you're good Thunder buddy.
Roger that, good buddy. And we've known each other for quite some time. We're both in the same industry, obviously. Go to conferences together. Live in the same town. We're located in Austin, Texas. But about a year ago, we started working together and bringing our kind of general friendship hijinks into the mix. Some of our office mates, our friends at work, were like, "Oh, you two riffing would just be the best podcast ever." Well, guess what? They're going to regret it.
They're going to regret it, just like the rest of the people in the office who aren't our friends regret it.
Oh yeah, totally. A lot of our office hates us, I would imagine. So we decided after a year of working together, and now that we're in quarantine and don't see each other as much, it might be fun to turn this into an actual thing and get off our butts and actually do it. So, why not wait until quarantine and for me to have a kid and very little free time to go, let's record a podcast. Why not? So what we're thinking we're going to do, and this is a very experimental concept, turn kind of the SEO podcast on its head a little bit and turn this into more of a what's behind the people that actually do the digital marketing work. What's there?
What drives?
Yeah. So the outside of the shop, what are we doing? And Keith and I have a lot of common interests. So this will be very easy for us to do, and we wanted to see if this would actually work in this format. So we're just gonna talk about us a little bit and the things that we like and our hobbies and kind of what makes us us, because at the end of the day, that does in some way inform the decisions we make in our jobs. But we're not going to talk shop necessarily. We're just going to talk us. So we thought, especially because this is probably the strongest common interest that we have other than Star Wars, but Keith would destroy me on that sort of knowledge, we thought we'd talk a little bit about our common interests in Japanese culture and anime. So, yeah, that's what we're going to do. And if this works, it'll become a thing. We don't have a title yet. It's going to be very Seinfeld-esque, not really about anything. There's a common theme, but it's going to go wherever it goes.
It's going to meander like a creek.
Oh, yeah, like a babbling brook.
Like a that is us. That's our podcast, The Babbling Brook.
The Babbling Brook. Oh, that's good. That might have to become the title. Working title, The Babbling Brook. So yeah, let's kind of start it out there. Yeah. Common interest being, let's start with Japanese culture.
Let's go with Japanese culture, or we can talk about. I mean, we connect on so many levels. That's one of the we are the Enneagram of friendship connection.
Our Venn diagram meets in several places. So Japanese culture itself, Keith, where did that start for you? What are your main interests? What interests you the most about it, and kind of what got you interested?
Yeah, this is something that's been with me since I was at least 9 years old. And it really kind of kicked off with the miniseries on NBC called Shogun, James Clavell's Shogun. They turned it into, I think, an 8-part miniseries. And so every week I was glued to the television, watching this fascinating culture, so many thousands of miles away. And, it just kind of stuck with me. And then, of course, martial arts, and then Ninja Mania of the 80s hit. And I was obsessed with ninjas and samurai and martial arts. And I probably took 21 years of martial arts myself. And it's really just sort of stuck with me. I mean, it was a very consistent evolution I would say, and it's been with me ever since. So you'll see me constantly talking about anime, J dramas, some Japanese band that I'm listening to. My favorite author in the world is Haruki Murakami, who's he should be a Nobel winning author, but he's not yet. It's just been with me for a very long time. How about yourself?
That's interesting. So my interest started really late. In the 90s when I was probably about 8, 9, 10, somewhere in there. That's when Cartoon Network started up its Toonami program, which brought a lot of anime over into Western culture. So I remember coming home from school, I think I was in like fourth grade, something like that, and Dragon Ball Z being on, and it absolutely blowing my mind. But I didn't know what it was, other than, this is just a cartoon that's a little more up there than, your Inspector Gadget or something else like that I was watching at the time. I think I was really big into the show Gargoyles, but I digress. So I remember those sorts of things being on, but I didn't really associate it with it being a cultural thing. So, Dragon Ball Z, Gundam Wing, I very much denounced things like Sailor Moon, and then the later evening programming like Cowboy Bebop and Outlaw Star, those just didn't really work for me. So fast forward a few years later to 2004, where I start dating my girlfriend, now wife, Jennifer, and she is just anime obsessed. She is full blown Inuyasha, Cowboy Bebop, Outlaw Star, everything that I was just not into other than Dragon Ball Z and Gundam Wing. So I decided to check it out a little bit. Still didn't really resonate with me until I started watching a show called Full Metal Alchemist. Now, that show for me just hit something that I can't really explain, but it made sense. It resonated. I liked it. My friend burnt me several data discs. I think it was like 15 data discs that included every single episode subtitled. So I spent a lot of time just watching those on my laptop. And this was before the show. It was on like episode 5 and I was already finishing it. So I was really ahead of the curve, and it hit me. It felt right. It felt like an awesome show. So I started kind of delving more into anime, and at night would watch Inuyasha and just whatever was on Cartoon Network or Adult Swim at the time. And it just became a thing for me. So much so that I got really big into Death Note when it came out, and ended up passing on that to my father, because I remember growing up, he always had, MTV on, but would watch, the animated shows. And I remember him always saying, these are cartoons for adults. So while they're cartoons, understand that they are not for kids, so I can't let you watch them. But I remember him watching, just the weird MTV animated programming. And then I think him watching Akira when I was a kid. So I just remember those things being around. So he got into Death Note with me. And we watched it together. We were even joking the other day, and this was like 16 years ago, something like that. We're talking about how, we need to have a Death Note marathon soon because it's been so long since either one of us watched it.
Mm-hmm.
So, it just kind of became a thing in my life. And then as I was graduating high school, going into college, that interest started turning into more of like an interest in Japanese culture. Kind of became my crutch for a little while. Started moving more into kind of that weeaboo territory, which got a little out of hand for me. So I kind of denounced it for a while and stopped watching stuff just because it became more of an obsession. And then kind of picked it up again a few years ago when I started kind of being a little bit more what I would say my adult self, where I was comfortable in the things that I liked. I had a career. So I felt good about bringing things back into my life without them turning into full life obsessions, and started, learning Japanese just as a fun hobby. So that's an on and off hobby that I do every now and then, and very much want to, go to Japan. My plan is to teach my daughter Japanese as she's growing up. Mm-hmm. So it's kind of been an evolution over time that got a little out of hand for a while, but now has been a more healthy place. So yeah, that's kind of it for me.
Yeah. Yeah. No, it's really interesting because you and I both grew up in the South. I don't know how rural you were.
I was in the cities.
Yeah, I was more near Asheville, but I was more rural. I was way out in the countryside, and part of me wonders why. If perhaps some of this obsession is the sort of general homogeneity of the cultures that we grew up in, and how seeing something so absolutely alien to what we grew up around might have been part of that fascination. I certainly know that was more than likely the case for me, because I grew up in an extremely homogenous area. I think the first black person I ever saw was when I was in college, most likely, or maybe high school. I think maybe high school. So this was not an area of the U.S. that was known to have very different people, and so seeing these I don't know, what was that, 17th century samurai in Shogun probably really hit a nerve with me, because I hadn't seen anything like that before. But it is really interesting psychologically, where that drive for escapism comes from, and what the root sources of that might be. Not that this is a psychology show, but it could be.
See, that's really interesting for me. The first 11 or 12 years of my life were spent in Jackson, Mississippi, which is a pretty huge city. It's the capital of Mississippi. I think it's in the top 10 biggest cities in the country. I can't really remember. But like, my school was 2% white. So, I got picked on quite a bit for being a white kid at school. So, I mean, I don't know if it was the cultural homogeny that was it for me, but I do remember when Dragon Ball Z came out and everyone being so obsessed with it, and I could draw Dragon Ball Z characters at least decent. Mm-hmm. I remember that almost being a social acceptance point for me.
Nice.
So that might have actually been it for me. That's interesting. I've never thought of that up until now. Huh. But yeah, I remember that being somewhat of like, hey, that kid can draw DBZ characters, draw this, and almost feeling accepted about it. Now, Gundam Wing, no one gave a shit about that other than me, so that didn't end up helping very much. But so I built my models by myself. But yeah, I think the DBZ might have been some level of social acceptance for me as a kid. That might be a part of it. Hey, we've broken some psychological ground here.
We've made a breakthrough. And now a word from our sponsors.
Yeah, like that'll ever happen.
What is the virtual counseling that you can go to now that's like become a really big thing during the COVID crisis?
Oh, I don't know.
I keep hearing it on podcasts, and like, I'll have to get the name of them, and say, hey,
if you would like to sponsor a podcast between two humans babbling, please hit us up. Twitch, PlayStation, Funimation, whatever. Hit us up. We want your money.
Crunchyroll.
Ooh, Crunchyroll for sure. We all want your money.
Yeah, the new season starts on Crunchyroll, of course.
Yeah?
It's just started. It is a season of fanosabas, as the Japanese would call it, for sure.
Yeah.
It's very it's really interesting to see some seasons that come out with anime, in the anime sphere, are really, really good, and they don't necessarily have to rely on the old tropes of sort of fan service and moe and a lot of the other things that if you really look at it can be kind of creepy. And I see, when people aren't fans of animes, I understand, I get it, because oftentimes they'll see probably what we consider the worst aspects of anime. Where it's like, oh yeah, that is kind of creepy, but if you watch this show, it doesn't have that, or it has a very limited amount of that moe sort of like big brother protecting the little sister thing. But we've got sort of this misfit of the demon high school coming out, and this is sort of this, I don't know if it's fan service, except that he is surrounded by female characters, so it is a bit of a harem, but he is an overpowered guy going to a demon high school, and he claims to be the reincarnation of the demon lord from many centuries ago, and so like everybody that tries to challenge him gets immediately defeated, and he's like, well, you can't beat me because I'm the demon lord. Then you've got the god of high school, which is an interesting It's an interesting show because it is a Japanese animation, I think, based on a Korean manga, if I'm not mistaken.
Interesting.
So the animation is really, really odd by comparison to normal anime. The noses are weird, the ears are weird, and that's just as a design guy. You watching that show, I guarantee you'll text me back and you go, "Yeah, these noses and ears are weird." But you can definitely tell the difference. But again, it's one of these sort of like, I wouldn't quite call it a shonen anime because shonen, which basically means boy in Japanese, but the style of anime that is shonen anime sort of rests on the premise of there is a kid who discovers he's got a power of some sort, and he has to, fight increasingly more difficult bosses in order to improve his power and protect his family or save the world or whatever it may be. Dragon Ball Z is a great example of a shonen anime. But this guy's already overpowered as it is. So I don't really know if this is just more violence. I don't know.
Is it like a One Punch Man?
Not quite that. Not quite One Punch Man. But I think it is sort of that fantasy of like, okay, what would happen if I was like this total badass and I was able to kick a lot of people's butts at any given time. Then there's Monster Girl Doctor. That just should tell you straight away that is a fully nothing but fan service anime. Monster Girl Doctor. And of course it's a guy who's a doctor to a bunch of monster girls. He's apparently oblivious to the fact that there's something, potentially sexual going on. He's just there to do his job, and he's an honorable young man. And of course, the women are falling all over him.
So it's like a Tenchi Muyo, but a doctor.
But a doctor, exactly. But a doctor. And then, of course, you've got the latest episode of That Time I Got Reincarnated as a Slime, which is a sort of a combination.
Oh, you told me about this at work one day.
Oh yeah, it's a fun anime. It is very much a fantasy driven anime though, because it's got everything. It's got harem, it's got moe, it's got fighting as an overpowered being, so to speak. And so sometimes when I look at these animes, I question myself. And I'm like, why am I watching this? And sometimes I'll watch them for about two episodes before I realize this is just not going to keep my attention, or I'm not in a moe mood this season, so I'm not going to watch this anime. But yeah, we've seen some really good ones. Demon Slayer in the past few seasons.
I was about to bring up Demon Slayer. This is something that I believe when I started work at IBM a year ago, so I'm a little over my year mark. You had mentioned it to me because I have a background in design, so you were like, "Oh, you'll really appreciate this art style."
Yep. But
I don't typically follow seasons of anime like you do. I'm more of a whenever it catches my attention, I'll watch it when I can. And I kind of took the opportunity to be on parental leave for 3 months to kind of play a little catch up with some stuff. So as I would take care of my daughters, I would feed her or change her or whatever, I'd have a show on. And Demon Slayer was that show for me. And my God, that recommendation was out of the park, man. That show is fantastic. I'm sad that it is not continuing at the moment due to the pandemic.
Yeah.
Sadly. But I mean, that's one that I'm thinking about even picking up the manga. I liked it so much. It's insanely good. So.
And that's a perfect example of a shonen anime. This is a guy who was sort of oblivious to this world of demons before his family was attacked and killed. And then suddenly he found himself in a position of having to avenge his family and sort of help his sister. And at the same time, grow stronger to fight these increasingly stronger demons as it is. So that is the formulaic shonen anime, but sort of the twist on that is that the story is quite compelling compared to a lot of other shonen anime, and as you mentioned, the artistry and the design throughout that anime is just incredibly beautiful and eye-catching, and probably unlike anything I've seen in any other anime prior.
I completely agree. I think it's one of the best examples of using CG in an anime that I've seen so far, because you have things like the newer Berserk show, which is absolutely horrendous, and you only watch it because they finally started to make something that's not the Golden Age arc. And yet it is just the worst looking show ever. But then you have something like Demon Slayer where it's traditional animation, but then it throws in the CG twist that is perfectly executed and almost seamless. It's awesome.
Yep. Kimetsu no Yaiba is the Japanese name for that show,
which means Demon's Blade for anyone wondering.
Interesting. I didn't know that.
Yes. I looked it up whenever I was watching it. I was like, what the hell does that mean? So threw that in there. And I believe, if I'm remembering correctly, it means Demon's Blade or probably Blade of Demons, something like that. So since you've been kind of an anime fan for probably quite a bit longer than me, what would you say is your favorite era even of anime, and what's your favorite anime itself?
It's really tough to say because each era has its own strengths. You've already mentioned one of my favorite animes, Death Note. And Death Note happened in a time that happened to have quite a number of very good animes that came out. That was a good era then, because I think they finally started to embrace the idea that the Shinya anime or the late night anime could really delve into some adult issues and have a compelling story that adults could relate to, rather than just being something that a high school student or a middle school student would want to stay up and watch, which they probably wouldn't, because they're so obsessed with making sure they're at school on time, according to all the animes that we watched. But yeah, the Shinya anime allowed animation studios to really get into a lot more not only horrific and violent, but also very touching animes as well. So I remember KyoAni, who unfortunately had that fire arson during a workday last year, and I think they just memorialized the anniversary of that fire for Kyoto Animation. So KyoAni had a series of shows, one of which was Clannad and Clannad After Story, which if you watch those shows and you don't cry, I want to ask you why you're not a human, and how you were able to be a robot and not get caught.
It's the anime version of Steel Magnolias.
Ugly crying anime. You just ugly cry at the anime, especially Clannad After Story. Ugh. Anyway, so yeah. Oh yeah. So I don't recommend you watch it, because you're just going to be like a blubbering mess. You're like, oh, this is so sad. But then, this was part of that whole, Shinya anime that allowed them to, have a heart and sort of have you not only dig into the horrific and terrible stories, but also the very heartwarming and heart-touching and, tragic animes as well. So, and I think because of that, we're now in an era where we can see really cool animes that come out as part of the Shinya late night anime series.
Yeah.
And we can appreciate that.
And while series got a little bit more mature around that time, the 2004 to 2009 era of anime is really when things started becoming like more visually appealing. The old school stuff like Bebop and Dragon Ball Z, so the mid to late 90s for us, late 80s to early 90s for Japan, was an excellent style, really good. And I typically gravitate more towards that style, but it became so much more visually appealing for the masses in the early mid 2000s, with shows like Death Note and things like that ended up being adapted to American audiences, through programs like Adult Swim very quickly. It was interesting to watch that shift, and it happened quick. It happened very quickly.
It's evolved quickly in general as an accessible industry for the United States. I mean, if you think about it, in that time in the 90s, well, actually not in the 90s, but certainly in the 2000s, the way you watched anime was you torrented it. You spent all night downloading a file that you then sort of probably had to patch together and watch as a whole, and I myself have torrented a number of shows in my time, but here we are. We got into the teens, the mid-teens especially, and you got Crunchyroll as a streaming service that you could watch online, which then hooked in through Chromecast and a few other possibilities, like I guess Apple TV might have one. And now this anime is being released on Amazon Prime, Hulu, Netflix, and HBO Max, for example. And so, we've seen just in a very short period of time, amazing transformation and availability of these animes.
Yeah. And HBO Max is a really, really good segue to something I was going to bring up. What are your feelings in relationship with something like a Studio Ghibli? I say Ghibli. Are you a Ghibli guy or a Ghibli guy?
I'm don't really know, so I won't have a strong opinion guy.
But what's your feelings on more of that Hayao Miyazaki type animation, and specifically his work?
His work is you know what, I appreciate his work ethic as a human being, because you would always hear stories about how people would come in late at night and he'd still be there working his ass off, and even after retirement he'd show up and work, and so that level of commitment and dedication to his craft is certainly admirable, and I think a lot of his films are really good. I've seen some of his son's work. I'm not as impressed with them, and I think that probably is just that I think the father probably had a much richer history, which at the same time might have been a little twisted, to be frank, because he absolutely, as much Western influence as he had on his had in his animes, he wasn't terribly fond of Western culture in general.
Oh, not at all.
Especially the United States. So you can tell there was some sort of history there with Miyazaki, and he's but I think because of that history, he was able to create some very compelling stories, and I appreciate the work that he did, even if he doesn't like me as an American.
See, and that's interesting to me, because I'm wondering if it might be a generational thing or what, because I remember Jackson Public Schools, so not the best education in the world. Teachers would kind of, whatever. It's Friday, bring in a movie and we'll watch it, sort of a thing. I remember one day, this one girl, and she was the weird girl in class. She had her boogers and stuff, so no one really took her seriously, because we were just mean kids. I remember she brought in what I found out was My Neighbor Totoro. And I remember it was raining like crazy outside, and we watched it. And I mean, realistically, at the end of the day, that's a really dry movie. If you watch that is a dry kids movie. And it's really, it deals with a lot of stuff. You're dealing with kids and their dad, two little girls and their dad moving across the country to be closer to their mom, who's in the hospital and possibly dying, as kind of the main plot of the story. But then at the same time, there's this adventure in the new house. They find what they think is spirits. They find those spirits lead them to this magical chunk of a forest where there's this, what they call a tree spirit, and he's this giant cat, and they're relating to him. And then there's a bus that's made out of a cat, and there's all sorts of craziness that goes on. But I remember that really being interesting to me as I think this was second grade, so I was in single digits at that time as far as age goes. But I remember that hitting me, and eventually getting a VHS copy myself and watching it all the time, and it resonating with me. So then eventually in my teen years, when I got into anime, started watching more things like Spirited Away, which is a fantastic film, Howl's Moving Castle, Ponyo, Princess Mononoke.
Yeah.
All those things. So those have been really big in my life and a part of my love for animation. Simultaneously, now that they're on HBO Max, other than I do own the Blu-rays back here somewhere, and I still collect physical media, streaming can't last forever, folks.
You're very hip.
It's that entryway into being a curmudgeon. Um, but it now being so widely available on a streaming service, I'm beyond excited that I get to show my daughter, when she's a little bit older, these films, which you can kind of equate to the Japanese version of Disney films. But at the same time, one of the main tropes of a Miyazaki film is a strong heroine. The main protagonist of his films is usually a female that has to overcome some adversity, and she does it with very little aid from anyone. So it's got this subtext that's usually very positive. So I'm excited to have that in her life. Which, I mean, you get that from a lot of Disney films, but still it has an American twist on it, which I tend to feel is probably a little more jaded and has some masculine tendencies to it, which I guess could be fine, but Miyazaki
it comes across as a little, the American films come across as a little disingenuous sometimes too.
Yeah, for sure.
And still even a little judgmental, whereas, and dare I say it, slightly sexualized, whereas you get into Mononoke Hime, for example, Princess Mononoke, and there isn't that sexual attention there. She's a badass wolf girl.
Yeah. 100%.
She is bloodthirsty and she doesn't mind getting her hands dirty. And, this is,
she actually saves a male character in that movie.
Yeah, she saves a male character in that movie.
It's great. It's wonderful.
And she doesn't even like him. She's just like, I don't even like you. But
and through the whole movie, she doesn't like him, and he kind of is more of the main character. But she comes in, hates him, saves him, and continues to hate him. It's great.
It's fantastic. Yeah. So I feel like the Japanese are a bit ahead in that respect. They're a bit behind when you get into the moe and the harem animes. We all have our weaknesses. There's so much that I think that we can learn and grow in our lives in. And I'd say that the strong female character, though, I think has been with the Japanese culture for a very long time. In samurai culture, the samurai were often forced to spend time in the capital with their daimyo, their regional governors, and then go back out into the countryside. Now, in the Tokugawa era of that time, the daimyo were forced to make their families live separate from them. So they either lived out in the country under guard of the Tokugawa soldiers, or they lived in the capital. And so they weren't always with their husbands. And as a result, a lot of these women had to become warriors themselves in order to protect wherever they were. So the naginata, the very long spear, became the tool of the female samurai warrior. There's also, of course, I said this when Aleda was talking about being an SEO ninja earlier this week. I'm like, well, how about an SEO kunoichi? And the kunoichi was a specifically trained female ninja during medieval times. And so these strong female warrior characters are nothing new to Japanese culture at all. Whereas I feel like they get sort of you'll get the occasional female warrior in Western culture. Apparently there were female Vikings.
Oh yeah.
And but we're just now discovering this. By the way, it wasn't something that we talked a lot about for centuries. Yeah. And you didn't really have a lot of this, women dressing in drag and going out to war, except for perhaps Joan of Arc. But the stories are they're here and there. They're very, very few and far between. Whereas in Japanese culture, it was quite common. It was a common thing to have a strong woman who will kick the crap out of you.
And rightfully so. White men especially deserve to have the crap kicked out of them. So one element of Japanese culture that I think I tend to sway a little bit more towards, where you necessarily don't, would be manga. What are your feelings on manga?
I just don't have the patience for it, I guess. I mean, I have so many other reading tasks that I involve myself in. I'm very much into, I always have a fiction and a nonfiction book open at any given time. But and even with American comics, like I'll get them, but I still have a stack of the new X-Men series that I haven't even cracked open yet. Just because I feel like I need to dedicate time to that, but then I don't have time because I'm working on other reading things. I have read other manga though. 21st Century Boys or 20th Century Boys was a great manga series. Very much enjoyed that. I've read a number of the Bleach manga. I just found that I didn't like it as much as I enjoyed the animes. You know, of course,
Interesting.
Yeah, that's just, you know, it's not a hate. It's just that I didn't like it as much. So stick with what you like.
So I think I go the other direction, where I prefer manga over anime. So another thing I've been doing through quarantine is actually reading through Bleach. Behind me, I have a giant bookshelf of manga, which is mostly Naruto and Bleach, with some things sprinkled in like Bakuman, Death Note, Hellsing, a little bit of Akira, and Yotsuba. Yotsuba's great. But
oh wait, Yotsuba is the little girl with the green hair?
Yes, made by the lady that made Azumanga Daioh.
I loved Azumanga Daioh. That is a
Azumanga's great.
anime.
But I really got into them, you know, hard and heavy when I was going into college. So I had, you know, my first job. I didn't have any, you know, rent or financial responsibilities really, because I worked like a mile or two away from my parents' house where I stayed for my community college years. So I would waste a bunch of money on comic books, and mostly American comic books, which were cool. I still love American comics, but I'm so far behind that it's almost pointless at this point. But the comics industry is always in a state of, you know, ebb and flow. So comics just became so expensive. I think they're $3.99, $4.99 now.
If you can buy them, most of them have moved online during the pandemic.
Yeah. So, I mean, a 22-page book for $3.99, really tough to sway as a kid that, you know, at that point I was making $6 an hour, working 20 hours a week, and I thought that was ridiculous. So I would much rather spend $9, $7 to $9 to get a 100-something page manga. So I started really devoting a lot of my comic efforts to, I think it was basically Naruto. So I have the entire first run of Naruto, which is 27 issues. So 27 volumes of that, and was absolutely hooked. I hated that show when it came out in 04, 05. I thought it was ridiculous. The kids wearing their damn headbands around all the time. I thought it was the worst. But I got into the manga and I got it. It made sense to me. I wore a headband for a while after that. It was stupid. I really regret it. That's when I had to cut it off. But I mean, and it's still great. I watched the show, and the show is good. But total, the show is like over 1,000 episodes.
Yeah, it's one of the longest running anime out there. Plus, you've got the various extensions of the show, which include Naruto Shippuden,
and now Boruto.
And now there's Boruto, which is his son.
Yeah. But Shippuden alone is 700 episodes.
Yeah.
And most of that's filler, which is what I hate. Same thing with Bleach. I really didn't like it when it came out.
Yeah.
I took a chance on a 3-in-1 volume that had the first, 3 volumes of the manga in it, and love it. The manga is insanely good. But I can never keep my attention on the anime.
No, the anime really, I think I want to say to the Japanese producers of media and entertainment, don't be like us. Don't be like America, because we do things like we run. And you and I had this conversation on text this past month when I rewatched The Big Bang Theory from start to finish.
Same. I did the exact same thing.
And I grew to absolutely hate that show, because after season 6, I kept asking, how much longer can this go? It needs to stop. And I think one of the things that American producers do is they say, oh, we've got something here. people really like this. Let's milk the hell out of it. Let's milk it until it bleeds, and then milk it some more after that. And so what we get is we get a 12-season Big Bang Theory that really could have been 6 seasons, and everybody would have left it and loved it and thought of it as this is the best part of my 20s, 30s, whatever, and been fine with it. But no, the American producers want to market and sell it as much as they can. The Japanese started doing the same things when they found out how people loved Bleach and they loved Naruto, and they started like building in these filler episodes to keep, because what they would do is they would produce the show, and then they would run out of original manga material, and then they have to wait for the next run of mangas from the artists. In the meantime, they would offshore to Korea or Vietnam the production of filler episodes where the main character goes off on a new quest in a different time zone, in a different world altogether, and
that's if you're lucky. Naruto filler, it literally disregards the main story altogether. So there's a point where Naruto and his best friend Sasuke, which are the two main points of the story, they end up getting in this huge fight. Sasuke runs off. Mm-hmm. Cool. Whatever. That's the end of the Naruto manga. Then there's like another 100 episodes where they're still bumming around, palling around like nothing ever happened. So if you don't read the manga, you're like, wait, what in the hell is going on?
Yeah.
It's ridiculous. It's crazy. Shippuden is just as bad, but they at least tie it in a little more. They do what they call mixed filler in it, where there's like, 50% actual main story going on, and then another 50% is just random crap in the episode that doesn't matter. But yeah, it's crazy. I get it though, because they want it to keep going, especially how popular it is. And Japanese culture is very quick. If something's not working, they'll shut it down. So a manga artist, especially one that has Rensai, which is when a manga goes weekly, it's so popular. If it declines in popularity, they'll just cancel it straight up, right out of the gate. Kishimoto Masashi, who does Naruto, now that it's done and Boruto's kind of more of he does the story, someone else does the art, I believe. He tried to do another manga in Weekly Shonen Jump. It got canceled like after a year, maybe.
Yeah.
So I mean, even someone like him who's been going since '99, not safe.
Yeah.
So it's definitely a culture of it. It's not working. Get rid of it.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the ways they can head that off, and one of the ways they can sort of prevent that from happening, is to just have a story they want to tell, and then tell it, and then be done with it. And what I've found is that a lot of my favorite anime and favorite J-dramas, for that matter, had a specific run. They ran 12 to 24 episodes, and they got their story told, and they were done. And I was happy because it ended on a note that made sense. Yeah. When they get into a situation where they've got to get rid of a show because it stopped being popular, they've got to find a really awkward way for it to end. And let me think about some American shows that did that. I mean, how many people loved the ending to Lost, for example? How many people love the way Game of Thrones ended? I mean, so these are shows that they ended in a very awkward way, and they didn't have to if they had just had a story they wanted to tell, stuck to it, and ended it in an appropriate fashion. But
our current version of the timeline, community joke, if any community fans out there, our current version of the timeline, which truly might be the darkest timeline, all TV shows must be written by Stephen King because the endings are just not there. So a little bit of a segue, and this for me personally relates to Death Note. You and I both, in our own way, are big fans of Japanese music. It became a huge thing for me during my college years. I remember watching Death Note and hit that second season, and we went from the kind of normal J-poppy, J-rocky sort of vibrato song by the band Nightmare, which I've never been a fan of, but then all of a sudden you get smacked in the face with a song called What's Up People by the band Maximum the Hormone, which everyone should check out if you're willing to try something new. And it blew my damn mind. And they became very quickly one of my favorite bands in the world. And I started exploring, way more Japanese music, especially, because Japan, when they make animation, so anime, They put a big focus on intros and outros per
Mm-hmm.
seasons, and they don't make their own stupid music like we do in America. It's looking at you, Pokemon. Um, but they use actual bands, and sometimes the bands even make music specifically for the show itself. So that through shows that I watched, like Full Metal Alchemist, Death Note, things like that, I found bands that I still love today, like Asian Kung Fu Generation, Duran Gray, Maximum the Hormone, Larkinsil.
Rookies is punked. One Ok Rock. Lisa, who
Lisa's good.
Lisa's fantastic, and I think she's made a boatload of money just from being popular with anime fans.
Oh, from Sword Art Online alone, now throw her into Demon Slayer.
Mm-hmm.
Ooh, she's just doing fantastic, or has to be. If she's not, something's wrong.
Mm-hmm.
But then, I mean, you get even more up and coming bands like, well, they're not anymore. They're an older band now, but Overworld, and now bands like Kanabun, who have been on Boruto, Naruto, Gundam Build Fighters. They've done tons, but it's a really easy way to get into music from Japan. What is your relationship with Japanese music? Let's start there.
You know what? I am a fan. I'm a fan of music. I'm a fan of music. There we go.
Same. Another one of our interests that we share.
Yes, I like music. You like money? We should hang out. The thing I like about the Japanese music that's coming out, specifically about the OPs and the EDs from animes, I think what they do is they have a mood that they want to capture with a song, and they know what the chord progression should be through the song in order to get to that mood, to get to that crescendo that makes you sort of really, really embrace whatever the mood is that the anime has been trying to capture. So Lisa's fantastic for action related anime. She's got that really strong female voice with vibrato and just really strong emotional means of singing, whereas other OPs and EDs were very mellow. I'm thinking of I'm suddenly blanking on the anime where it was a country doctor that he walked around. He had white hair and he was missing one eye, and he helped remove spirits from people.
Oh, I know what you're talking about.
But all of the OPs and EDs for that show were very mellow, and they're very emotional because there was always an emotional story behind how this person got sick and how that their sickness has affected people around them. But that's one of the things I've always really appreciated about the Japanese songs. The other side of it is the technical side of a song, because you can listen to a song from Maximum the Hormone or One Ok Rock, and you can hear those guitars in the background and the drums in the background, and you're like, that is talent. Because you hear the way they are hitting the notes, the precision with which they are hitting the notes, the rapidity with which they are hitting those strings, and you're like, that is a hell of a guitarist, or that is a hell of a drummer. And so I respect them on those two different levels. Is they know how to build to the crescendo to get the emotional response that they want, and they are technically some of the best musicians in the world, I would say.
Well, and I think the other thing that sometimes people that are into Japanese music will tend to bring up is that here in America, Western culture in general, you want to put everything into a box. So genre labeling is huge. If we had the rest of the day, I could probably rattle off a ton of different subgenres of metal and rock and even hip hop. But in Japan, it's just constant genre bending. Mm-hmm. So something like Maximum the Hormone, there's obviously the elements of metal, but then they bring in like poppy elements and elements of ska and punk, and they're just all over the place. And then their main singer will rap sometimes. Like, it's crazy. Then you have bands like Baby Metal, where they're very much into idol culture but have the metal backing. So I mean, they're not afraid to play around and experiment, and they do it successfully. Whereas here, you get a band that they're really in their groove. Maybe bad example, but let's say Metallica made a pop out. Hey, their Lou Reed album, the Lulu album. No one gave a shit about it because it tried something different. And granted, it's not a good album. Let's just throw that out there. So it doesn't even do it well. But
how many Metallica fans talk about Load and Reload, right? Anyway,
dude, I grew up on Load and Reload. I kind of like them. But Lulu, man, you throw Lou Reed into the mix and it just becomes this weird thing. But they tried something different. If they would have been a Japanese band and tried to do that, it probably would have worked. But they would have had years of building off of that instead of being a thrash metal band that tried to bring Lou Reed into the mix.
Yeah, I have nothing against bands that are trying to sort of they're trying to update the sound and they're trying to move the musical genre in a specific direction. But I do feel like the Japanese tend to do it quite well. They are. I will say this. I will say they are fast. They are some of the best fast followers in the world. So you'll get a band like One Ok Rock. By the way, the name of that band comes from the fact that the studios in Shinjuku would open up reservations for bands to play in the studios for free after 1 o'clock in the morning. And so One Ok Rock is a Japanese play on the word 1 o'clock. But anyway, so you have a band like One Ok Rock that came out and they were really popular in Japan at the time. The sound that they had though was about 1.5 years or 2 years behind other bands here in the States. But they did it exceedingly well. And I think probably better than what we had here, in many ways. Screamo happened after Screamo happened here, you had Duran Gray, 5 to 6 years after Marilyn Manson,
maybe. I think officially Duran Gray's first album came out in like 2000, 2001. So, 5, 6 years after Manson, but they were around before because they were very much a Visual K band starting out.
Oh, yes. Starting out, they were Visual K, which is not at all like what they became.
No, they're a metal band now. They're just a straight up badass metal band. They just they put out an album last year, I think, and it's finally up on Spotify because someone opened up the floodgates and finally let Japanese music onto Spotify in the US. There's still not enough ex Japan though, so make that happen, whoever you are.
Do it now.
But Duran Gray released an album where they re-recorded some of their old songs because some of their old songs were a little bit more tame in comparison, and they're just straight metal songs now. It's insane. It's awesome. So, I think we're kind of hitting that point, man. We're like at that hour mark.
Right at the hour mark, yeah.
Can you think of anything else that you really wanted to talk about regarding Japanese culture that interests you?
Not in particular. There were some rumors floating around this week or past couple of weeks that and I hate rumors, by the way. I hate industry rumors coming out of Hollywood that Disney was going to retcon the sequels for Star Wars because they had just had sort of fallen so flat with the fans. And
the only good rumors is the Fleetwood Mac album.
Exactly. Yeah, I agree with that. But I was thinking that if they were in fact going to retcon the sequels in Star Wars, so in other words, The Force Awakens through The Rise of Skywalker, that the best people to be involved with that would either be Dave Filoni, who was responsible for The Mandalorian and the Clone Wars, as well as Jon Favreau, of course, or hand it over to a Japanese animation studio and have them give it a proper treatment.
That would be interesting. I could get into that. One other thing that I was going to bring up, and you might even want to put this on your radar, but I know that you have a hard time with this: video games. So they're.
Yeah, I don't have a hard time with it. I just have I can't sit for terribly long, so I end up putting a lot of stuff on pause, getting up and walking around and coming back. So
there's a new one coming out, and I think it might be a PlayStation exclusive, so you might not even be able to give this a shot since you're an Xbox guy. But Ghost of Tsushima, it is a samurai game. It's based in medieval samurai era. you've lost this war, and you're going after the invading Mongolians to kind of get payback, and they call you the Ghost, and you have the option to fight honorably, so approach, bow, fight, bow at the end, or you can go in for the sneaky bastard stealth kills type of a thing. Really, really cool visual game. You should check it out. It comes out, I think, next week, but at the same time, it's very much inspired by, Japanese samurai cinema. So like the Kurosawa type stuff, the Toshiro Mifune. And I believe it has a mode in it where it goes black and white and adds grain to it so that it looks like a samurai film. So something to check out. Definitely something on my my otaku radar that I will be participating in next week once it comes out.
Well, while you do that, I'll focus on watching the actual Toshiro Mifune movies. That's always a good way to spend your time.
I'm working on that as well, especially now that they're on HBO Max. Thank God they added the Criterion Collection, because they have, Yojimbo, Seven Samurai, the Samurai Saga. They have a bunch of, or the Samurai Trilogy. They have a bunch of the Lone Wolf and Cub movies. Super stoked on that.
Is Hidden Fortress on there?
I think it is.
Okay.
And 47 Ronin, I believe, is on there. There's a bunch. And all the Godzilla films. But watching something that heavily dubbed is really hard to do with a newborn. So I'm a little behind where I wanted to be once HBO Max came out.
Just hey, brush up on your medieval Japanese. You'll be fine. You won't have to. You don't need subtitles.
For sure. Let me get on that. Also, learning Japanese with a newborn, not easy. Cool, man. This was awesome. We'll definitely. We'll have to continue doing this. Let's see if we can get some other people on to talk about the stuff they like. And maybe we'll even do a part 2, because evidently an hour is not enough.
Apparently not.
Cool, man. Well, it was good talking to you. And hopefully this will be up soon. We'll see how it goes.
Make it so. Engage. This has been the Austin Otaku Podcast. To learn more about us and our show, to be a guest, or to subscribe to our show, go to www.austinotaku.com and follow us on Facebook and Twitter.